Good morning, everyone. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. Happy Tuesday. It doesn't feel like Tuesday, but I guess it is. It feels like it should be a Thursday. But either way, happy Tuesday. It's going to be a beautiful, beautiful day today. Hopefully, you guys are all doing great. Good morning, Karen. I think it's so funny. I don't know how YouTube works, but I love it when I come in and there's already people on YouTube. And I'm always like, how do you guys get in there so early? I guess Facebook. I don't think that works. I don't think Facebook works away, but who knows? Lots to talk about today. I don't have a whole lot of time. I know I'm only supposed to be an hour show, but I talk so darn much. I usually end up going over an hour, but I can't do that today. I have to work, and so therefore I have got to get through some stuff today. Good morning, Carl. Good morning, Jay. Hopefully you guys are having a good morning today. Lots again to talk about today, and some of the things we're going to talk about. I want to talk about what happened yesterday in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. We have a man, Robert Dorgan, who committed a mass shooting. He targeted his family. It was a domestic type situation. Another person, I hate to say it, another trans person acting out in violence. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about why in this particular instance this crime may have occurred and why is there so much anger, within the trans community, because there certainly is a lot of anger. And then I want to talk about, I've got a video to show you guys. White women, we joke around about white super liberal women and how they are some of the primary problems. And when we see these agitators against ICE and speaking up at the school boards and causing issues and all of these different things. So we're going to talk about that. I have a video of a lady, a white woman who hates being white so much that she will not date anyone in the white community. It's actually kind of humorous. I want to talk a little bit about a Norwegian scientist testing out Havana Syndrome, ended up with some brain damage. Just goes to show there's a lot of other countries who are trying to create these weapons. And of course, he works for the government. He's definitely attempting to create a weapon. We're going to talk about Iran, a lot of new developments with the situation going on in Iran. And I want to talk about, I've talked a little bit about the Zorro Ranch recently. So much talk, of course, about Epstein, the Epstein files. We know that, Epstein had the Zorro Ranch in New Mexico. We know there's been a lot of calls for investigations into the Zorro Ranch, but it was bought by a Republican from Texas. So we're going to talk a little bit about that because I'm a little bit confused about this situation, quite honestly. I don't know if this guy bought the ranch to hide Epstein's crimes or to expose them. Maybe you might have a better idea than I do. Hillary Clinton this morning stating that she wants to testify in public. And then, of course, we're going to talk about the latest in the Nancy Guthrie case because how can we not? Today's day 17, day 17. And they're getting closer. They're getting closer, but no answers yet. So we're going to get into that towards the end of the show. And I'm going to start out talking about Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, their names have been embroiled with the Epstein case for, since day one, right? Since day one. Both of them have been on the Lolita Express. Both of them have been to Epstein Island. I'm not saying, I don't know what either one of them have done. I just don't know. I think a lot of people have some ideas because they know what Epstein, of course, was capable of. But Donald Trump has actually defended Bill Clinton and said he didn't do anything wrong, which I find strange. Quite honestly, I find it strange that Donald Trump would say that Bill Clinton did no wrong. But either way, maybe he's trying to be diplomatic about it or not pointing fingers. I really honestly I don't know. But what I do know is that Bill, of course, Clinton was always known as a womanizer. I've not heard any reports of him, ever having situations with underage girls. I'm not going to say it didn't happen. Maybe you guys have heard something I haven't. But either way, of course, there's been a lot of calls for those two to testify in regards to the Epstein case. And they, at first, remember, they tried to block it everywhere, they possibly could. Some people even going back and blaming the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping on the Clintons because of Savannah Guthrie's husband, Michael Feldman, working as a PR person, within the company. I can't remember, was it called Cooper? I think Cooper something or another that did the PR for the Clintons. But the Clintons have decided they are going to testify. If they're not, they're going to be held in contempt of court. But now just this morning, Hillary Clinton said she wants to testify in public. She doesn't want it to be behind closed doors. She said she wants the public to hear the truth. Now, I'm not sure how much truth we're going to hear from the Clintons. Just because you testify under oath doesn't necessarily mean you're telling the truth, particularly if it's a crime nobody can prove. Because as we talked about yesterday, where we heard from Congresswoman Nancy Mace that there is video. There's a lot of video that Epstein had peepholes and different cameras placed around his properties, and he's got plenty of video. But the CIA has it. It was not released with all of the other files. It's not expected to be released. She's going to do her best to get it out of the hands of the CIA. I think we all know that's never going to happen. And those videos, that would be the smoking gun in this case to tie everything together. You can say a lot of stuff over emails. You can, pass along a lot of accusations at people, but unless you have something that ties it together, it's nothing more than hearsay. Anybody could dismiss all of these emails. In fact, of course, when it comes to Donald Trump, they do dismiss the emails, as you know, because anytime it's mentioned in the Epstein files that Donald Trump actually assisted with the investigation, then people want to say, oh, that's made up, that's not true. Or certain people that people like, you say, oh, their names in the Epstein files. Well, show me the document. I don't believe it. I think it was planted there. So it's a lot of hearsay. It's a lot of hearsay. All of those Epstein emails, it could have been made up. We just don't know. It's a very good possibility Epstein used those emails as blackmail. He might have told some of these people, hey, I've got this email in my system and I'm going to keep it there. And someday somebody's going to find it and you're going to get in a lot of trouble because they're going to assume that what I'm writing is true. But as you guys know, a lot of those emails are pretty horrific. They talk about murder and torture and certainly trafficking. And some of the things I have read in those emails are shocking. They're really, quite honestly, above anything I could even imagine to be true. Talking about babies and children. And of course, a lot of it is not full statements because, the statements that people use, they were very careful, I think, in what they emailed, in that you could take it one way or the other. There's not context necessarily to some of the statements. So therefore, guess what? Without video, I really don't know how far those could go. But we are going to talk about the Epstein Ranch. I'm going to catch up to comments, Sherry. They developed AI for this exact moment. No one can believe anything. You're right, Sherry. AI changes everything. Good morning, Karen. Carl says, I haven't heard DJT say BC didn't do anything wrong. Yeah, Carl, he has definitely made that statement. I'm not really sure why, but he has. And good morning, Kim. Yeah, not too long ago, I thought I played it on the show. I may not have. But yeah, there is a video of Donald Trump saying, oh, Bill Clinton, yeah, his name's on there. He didn't do anything wrong. And, I don't know. I don't know. Sometimes I don't know. That's all I can say is I just don't know. I don't understand Donald Trump's motives in some situations because only he knows. A lot of people, of course, think he directed Pam Bondi to hide some of the files, not necessarily to hide what he himself did, because I think that had he done anything or had his name been in any kind of files or on video, Democrats, the CIA, they definitely would have used that against him. That would have been certainly a situation in which the CIA would have released video, to hold that against him. And, and I'm just playing devil's advocate here. There are people who say that Israel is behind the Epstein files, that they supported Epstein monetarily. He was an agent working for Israel, and they sent him out to meet with all of these different government officials from various countries and get them on tape so that he could blackmail them. There are people, again, just playing devil's advocate, who say that Israel has information against Donald Trump, and they know what's in the files, and that the reason why Donald Trump has befriended, Netanyahu and has carried out and worked so closely with Israel is because he doesn't want to be exposed. They're holding it against him as blackmail. Now, I don't personally believe that, because the reason why I don't is I think that Democrats, prior to them allowing Donald Trump to become president back in 2016 and then again in 2024, they wouldn't care what Israel had to say, quite honestly, because most of them don't like Israel. And they would have taken that information and exposed it all across the world to make sure Donald Trump didn't win. So I'm not really buying that theory, but that is a theory that's out there and running. And Carl says, I have heard him say he didn't know. Yeah, Carl, I'll have to find the video for you. I promise you with my entire being that Donald Trump did say that Bill Clinton didn't do anything. And so then we have, of course, the Epstein, the Zorro Ranch. If you recall all of Epstein's files, Epstein, he had several different properties. Of course, he had the island, he had the townhouse, he had a property in Palm Beach. I haven't heard a lot about what was going on in Palm Beach. As a matter of fact, the only information I think I've heard about Palm Beach was that that's where he had a lot of the massages and different things like that. And I've heard the townhouse in New York City is where most of the big parties happened, where a lot of the trafficking occurred. Of course, the island entertaining various officials from all over the world there, not only at the townhouse, but of course at Epstein Island. And then we have the Zorro Ranch. The Zorro Ranch is in New Mexico. We kind of touched base on that yesterday. It's a huge complex. If you've seen it, it's a huge complex. It's a huge helicopter pad. And now, you haven't heard the Zorro Ranch mentioned as much. A lot of people don't even know that Epstein owned a ranch, but he did, and it's called the Zorro Ranch. Again, it's in New Mexico. And it's very much set up, even after his death. I think of it like Area 51. There's been journalists who've gone out to the Epstein Ranch in New Mexico, and they have walked up towards the gates, and you have these guards, armed guards, running around on different types of vehicles, and if you even approach the gates, they will come out and reprimand you to leave. And God forbid anyone would try to sneak in and find out any information. So that place was probably protected more than Fort Knox, even after Epstein's death. So you got to wonder, okay, he's gone. What's there to protect outside of property value? And so recently we talked about this Don Huffines. Now, Don Huffines, he is a Texas guy. He is very much MAGA, very much a Donald Trump supporter. Well, he recently purchased Zorro Ranch. I think we talked about that. He bought it in kind of a secret hush hush deal. And it was just recently revealed that he is the person that bought it. Now, Turning Point USA recently, they nominated, well, not nominated, they endorsed, that's the word I'm looking for, they endorsed Huffines as the comptroller, the Texas State comptroller. And you can kind of, if you're going to look at this, you can kind of see these things tying together, right? And a lot of people, of course, have said that Huffines also is Israeli backed. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's just the rumor out on the streets, is that Huffines is Israeli backed. And again, I don't know if that's true or not. He is definitely MAGA. He is definitely a Donald Trump supporter, and certainly a Republican. And everything I've heard about him, he's a really good guy. I've not heard anything bad about David Huffines. And Carl says Zorro is over 7,600 acres. I was wondering, Carl, how big it was. I knew that it was enormous. If you look at it, it's beautiful, but it is absolutely enormous. Well, the Zorro Ranch is where supposedly the worst of the worst occurred. We talked about that a little bit yesterday. Some people say the movie Eyes Wide Shut, made by Kubrick, and some people actually say that Kubrick was killed because of him making the movie Eyes Wide Shut. I don't really think that's true. It's just one of those conspiracy deals that's out there, Stanley Kubrick. But of course, most of us have seen that movie. Well, a lot of people believe that movie was based on events that took place at the Zorro Ranch. Now, I don't have any way to know if that's true or not true, quite honestly. But that's what a lot of people do believe. And they say that all of the worst happened at the Zorro Ranch, and that all of the bodies, now we know this is true. This part is actually a fact, where Congress has stated, yes, there absolutely were murders. There were people tortured. There were allegedly babies killed. This is all in the emails. Now, whether they're real emails or staged emails, of course, we have no way to know. Nobody has seen these videos that we know of. However, they say that if there are bodies associated with Epstein, they're all buried at this Zorro Ranch. Now, New Mexico state officials have been coming out very strongly saying that, hey, we want to go in and we want to investigate the Zorro Ranch. We believe that bodies are buried there. So we want to go in and take a look. And I think what's interesting about this is Huffines said no. He does not want an investigation to occur at his Zorro property. So I'm very confused by that. At first, I kind of thought, Well, maybe he purchased the Zorro Ranch as being a MAGA guy, a Trump supporter. Maybe he purchased kind of underhanded because nobody knew who it was that purchased it. He purchased it, rather anonymously. And we thought, okay, well, maybe that's because he wants to expose what Epstein actually did. But now, when we're kind of down to this point of New Mexico wanting to go in and investigate, he's like, nope. Nobody's coming to my Zorro Ranch and investigating. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know if maybe it's part of a facade where he's acting like, hey, I bought this property where Epstein is famously buried the bodies, like literally, and I'm gonna expose everything Epstein did. Here's the bodies, folks, everything you heard was true. Or if he's gonna be like, hey, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe he purchased this property so that no one will ever know. I'm not really sure what to think. I hope you guys have a better answer than I do, because right now I really just don't know. I've been thinking about it the past couple days, because I'm like, man, if this is where the bodies are buried, here we got this MAGA guy, who purchased the ranch. This is the perfect opportunity to do some surveillance. They've got different types of machinery, technology that can tell if they see that bodies are buried on a certain piece of property without digging up anything. Different types of sonar equipment. And is he going to let them do it? Is he going to have a choice? It might come down to that. He may not have a choice. It could be that the state of New Mexico may say, hey, this is an investigation, a homicide investigation, and you don't have a choice. We're going to issue a warrant. We're going to come out. We're going to search your property, whether you like it or not. Of course, all we can do is wait and see how things unfold. But I think they're going to unfold rather quickly, because we know there's a lot of Congress people who are certainly in favor of going up to the Zorro Ranch and investigating, and now New Mexico officials themselves. So we're going to see what David Huffines does. Is he going to allow the investigation to occur? I think this is going to be a real turning point for a lot of us, literally a turning point, no pun intended, to find out what's going on. Why did he buy the Zorro Ranch? MAGA guy from Texas. Why did he buy the Zorro Ranch? Is he backed by Israel? We don't know. Just rumor. Why is it that Turning Point USA has endorsed him as Texas comptroller? And then lastly, is he going to allow this investigation to occur? And if he doesn't allow the investigation to occur, I think we will all have a lot of answers, won't we? I'm not trying to get down too far into the conspiracy bin of things, but there's a lot of people who've talked a lot about Erica Kirk and Turning Point USA. I'm not going to go down that road. I don't have any issues with Erica Kirk, and I love Charlie Kirk, of course. I had the distinct pleasure of interviewing him in person in studio at one of my old radio shows when I was on Real Talk 93.3. He came in studio. We had a lot of good guests that came in studio. He was one of them. He was here in the St. Louis area to speak at I think it was Grace Church. And we got to interview him prior to him going on his way to the church to give a big speech. Fantastic person, obviously. As a matter of fact, later on, not right now, I'm going to play a quote by Charlie Kirk that I think we all need to hear. So I'm going to do that here in a little while. It's not related to this, but a lot of people are turning against Turning Point. Have you noticed that? There's a lot of people who, for whatever reason, they don't like Erica Kirk. To me, she seems like a perfectly sweet girl, a wife who lost her husband, and I don't personally have an issue with her. But you hear, of course, I know you guys have heard the rumors and a lot of the talk about her parents and what her parents have been part of and the Israeli connections and back and forth. I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. Carl said, I heard the same thing. The new owner is not cooperating. No, he's not cooperating with search requests. There could be legit legal reasons. If he is saying no at this point, make them get the warrants is always a good plan. Yeah, I don't get it. I just don't get it. And Tony says, why didn't they search in the first place? Tony, that's also a good question. And it's a question that's been on my mind for quite some time now, is that, I feel like they've tried to hide. And who's they? Oh, I remember Vic Faust on my old show, The Edge, War on COVID, when we were on those shows, and cancel this. We were on a lot of shows together. Every time I would say they, he's like, who is they? Tell everybody who they is. I would say they is everybody. In this case, they is everybody. It's the all of Congress. I've never heard anyone in Congress on either side of the fence saying that we need to go out to the Zorro Ranch and investigate. Nothing. I've never heard anybody saying we need to go to the Zorro Ranch and see what happened, look at surveillance footage, because they've got surveillance cameras everywhere. I've never heard of any subpoenas looking for surveillance images. And if you look through all of the documents for Epstein, you hardly ever hear anything about the Zorro Ranch. And I think there's a reason why. I really do. I think I agree that that's probably where the center of things were. And that's why they can, he's got this New York townhouse. You can't really bury anybody there. Palm Beach, not going to happen there. Anyone would notice that. The island, he could probably get away more with the island. Of course, that is under private ownership now too, but they did at least go out and do a lot of investigations on the island. Nothing there, but we have this untouched Zorro Ranch, as Carl pointed out, 7,600 acres being bought by a big MAGA person. And, I really had hope that, hey, MAGA's buying it. Let's get out there and do some research and see what we dig up. But, nobody even wants you to talk about the Zorro Ranch. I'm not kidding you. They don't even want you to talk about it. And I've not heard one congressperson talk about it, except for Nancy Mace and maybe Anna Paulina Luna. That's about it. And Mike says, just found this channel. Good to see you back. Oh, okay, Mike. Well, good to see you. You watched Cancel This one. Glad that you found us. Hopefully, I will meet your standards. I'm a little scatterbrained sometimes. It's hard to produce and talk on my own show. And Carl says, let's see here. Sweet girl, you might want to look at her a bit more. You talk about Nancy Mace or Anna Paulina Luna. I do like them both. Good morning, Annette. Good morning, Nancy. And let's see. Tony says, I assume the CIA has all the tapes, videos. Those appear to be missing. Yeah, Tony, you might have jumped in right after I was talking about that. I talked a little bit about yesterday. I talked about it a few moments ago, is that Congresswoman Nancy Mace has stated very clearly that A, she fears for her life, B, that, the CIA has all of the video surveillance, that yes, Jeffrey Epstein absolutely did have little peepholes, hidden cameras in all of his properties and plenty of video to be had, but no one knows where it is outside of the CIA having those files. And no one outside of Nancy Mace is asking for those files, which I also find it interesting. That's why I said they encompasses a very large group of people. As much as I love Donald Trump, and I love President Trump, and I think he's done some really great things, I feel like he's really holding back on these Epstein files. Now, that could be because somebody has something over his head. It could be because he knows that if he, as the president, wants those files truly released, everything unredacted, let's say, and quite honestly, outside of victim names, there's no reason why these files can't be completely, opened up unredacted. There really is no reason why, because the files are mostly email, testimony. A lot of that information's already out there. There's really nothing new for us to explain and look over other than the actual emails themselves in the video, which we'll probably never get the video. But, there is a very good possibility that Donald Trump knows. I mean, look what happened to Kennedy. They've already attempted to assassinate Donald Trump a couple of times, probably more times than that we don't even know about, attempts that were foiled ahead of time before anybody could get that far. I think he realizes, just like Nancy Mace does, that their lives are literally on the line. And that is because there are a lot of very big names, very powerful people involved. And think about this. If it is true that Zorro Ranch was used for the worst of the worst, all of the worst things you can imagine, probably actually more horrific than you can imagine, and that all that happened at the Zorro Ranch, they're going to protect that with everything they have. And we're going to see it fold out before our very eyes in the coming days, because New Mexico is not giving up. New Mexico said they are going to investigate. They're going to find out what's happening at the Zorro Ranch. And you know what? If Don, I keep calling him David, if Don Huffines doesn't allow New Mexico investigators to come in and search the Zorro Ranch, I think that's going to tell us everything we need to know. Don't you think? All right, let's see here. Carl says, talking about Kirk, you said you thought sweet. Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's a lot of people who who, for whatever reason, don't like Erica Kirk. And as a matter of fact, last night, for whatever reason, I was just scanning through social media like I always do, and entirely too often that I do. And I saw the Turning Point USA Facebook page. And there were people on there who said they were leaving. They're like, we don't know who's running this page anymore. It is certainly not Turning Point USA. And they said they're leaving. And I saw all these people, commenting that, yeah, we're not sticking around. We don't know who, we don't know what's going on. We don't understand it. Now, I don't know if maybe the Turning Point USA staff has just not been on top of the Facebook page, but I looked through that page and there was some crazy stuff on there posted. So I'm thinking that whoever is in charge of moderating that page is just not doing it anymore. There was some spammy stuff on there. There were some really weird, crazy posts. Whatever is going on at the Turning Point USA Facebook page, somebody needs to get control over it because they're probably not going to have any followers for much longer. There was some crazy stuff on there. Good morning, Sandy. And so that I wanted to make sure I cover that. And I know that we're supposed to move on. I know, I get it. We've been told how many times to move on. Don't talk about the Epstein files. Just don't. Just let it go. I think that the emails are nothing there. There's no smoking gun in those emails. There continues to be people that stepped down. Yesterday, J.B. Pritzker's own brother, Thomas, as a matter of fact, stepped down from his role at Hyatt Hotels because of his name being mentioned numerous times within the Epstein files. And I think people really are giving themselves away because if you look at this final, list that was released, there's so many names on there. Like I said yesterday, that's just an attempt to muddy the waters. That's all that is. They release this list and they say, okay, you guys, you're not giving up. You want a list of the names on the Epstein files. Here's your list. It's like 2.5, I think, pages long. This list was with all these names. And on that list, there's like Janis Joplin, Elvis Presley, Queen Elizabeth II, all of these people, I don't know. Maybe Ben Franklin was on there. I'm not really sure. But there's all these names on there who were not alive during Epstein's life. Or when he was a child. So everybody's like, okay, well, this doesn't make any sense. You've got all these different names on there. What is this list exactly? So what they did, instead of telling us the names of the actual perpetrators of the accused people, men, some women, listed in the Epstein files from actual victims, they didn't do that. What they did is they took the Epstein emails and somehow they used some type of program to take every single person's name out of those emails. And so let's just say as an example, if Epstein received an email and it said, hey, remember Queen Elizabeth II? Back in the day, she was a great ruler. I mean, just any nonsense. Well, her name would have automatically been taken out and put on that list. And that's to muddy the waters. So that way they can say, okay, there's this big list of people. These are all the names that were in the Epstein files, but there's no context. Okay, we see Thomas Pritzker in here. His name is mentioned multiple times, but is he actually guilty of doing anything? Or is he just listed because his name came up in conversation? It's just to muddy the waters. That's all it is. That's not a real list. It's just not a real list. And Tony says they have to destroy Turning Point. There's a lot of talk about Turning Point going either direction there. It's certainly not what it was, I think, when Charlie Kirk was around. But I don't know that that's anybody's fault. And I'm certainly not blaming Erica Kirk for it. Because if people watch her like a hawk, I don't know if you saw recently. I never watched Charlie Kirk's show. I don't watch television. I don't watch podcasts. I don't listen to radio shows. I don't want any of that stuff to influence how I think or how I talk. I read the news and that's it. Anything you hear from me is stories I've read, not stuff I've watched on television or heard from other podcasters or different types of news, because I don't watch any of that stuff. But I did see the backlash saying that Erica Kirk put away their wedding picture that used to sit behind, I guess, I'm assuming she hosts the show now. Honestly, I don't even know. And there used to be that wedding photo of them back there. Then everybody noticed it was removed. I don't know why she removed it. Maybe it was a difficult reminder, what her life was. Maybe, as a young person, she's moving on. I don't know. I have my own thoughts, but I'm just going to keep those to myself. And let's see. Tony says if they were mentioned, they were on there, which is BS. Yeah, there's a lot of names on that list if you've looked through it. And let's see here. Sandy says, I just think Erica Kirk is suspicious. I just do. Something seems off and do not think the furry was in this alone. The furry? Oh, the furry was in this alone. Yeah, I agree. And you know what I think most interesting about what happened with Charlie Kirk is how quickly they shut down the investigation. And how I like Cash Patel. I do. I like Dan Bongino. I like all these folks that are part of Donald Trump's administration. But I seriously do think they look at us and lie through their teeth quite often. And maybe they don't have a choice, maybe they're doing what they have to do to protect the United States. Now, the way I feel about it is if, in fact, all this crazy satanic things occurred and babies were being murdered, children trafficked, and horrific things happen, if that exposes every big name in this entire world, if it just tears our government apart, then so be it. Let it tear everything apart. I don't care. We'll be better off for it. Let's get all these ridiculous Satanists out of our government. How about that? Out of the governments all across the world. We'll rebuild. We'll start over again. If that's how these people really are, I don't care if it does tear everything apart. But I think that what has to happen in order to keep people from panicking or for the stock market from crashing, they have to lie to us. We see Cash Patel sit there in front of us on a video screen saying there was only one person responsible for Charlie Kirk's death. There was nothing else. There was no one else. There was no conspiracy. That's it. And then all of a sudden on social media, if you started talking about it, you'd get zinged, and by zinged, placed lower in the news feed, or, maybe I haven't heard of anybody being banned lately from social media, but certainly placed lower in the news feed. And they just don't want you to talk about it. Now, all of us, I don't care if you're a conspiracy person or not, all of us can look at what took place in the Charlie Kirk shooting, and we all know there was more to the story. You'd have to be blind and deaf to not know there's more, just because of the fact that we know there were people who had knowledge of what was going to happen that day ahead of time, because all those idiots, remember, went online and posted about it. A lot of folks in the trans community went out and they were posting about it. And of course, then you hear, I can't even remember what that guy's name was now that I think about it, that did shoot Charlie Kirk. If one of you say it, I'll be like, oh yeah, that's right. But if you looked at the photos of the shooter, in my opinion, it didn't even look like him, because that guy had a very forward kind of chin. The person walking up and down that stairwell really didn't. And here's this guy walking up and down the stairwell with a long rifle shoved down his pants. Nobody noticed it. It was really weird. And then they try to tell us, oh, well, he took off out from the scene. And what was the story again? He took the gun apart. He had taken the gun apart, put it in his backpack, took it out to some grassy knoll outside of the campus there, and then put the gun, reassembled the gun, and put it back together and laid it under a tree. I mean, none of that made any sense. And Carl says the public is now free to search out the context of every name on the list. Also true, also true. And let's see here. The list is like saying just because you were at the bank the day it was robbed doesn't mean you robbed a bank. That's a very good analogy, Mike. You got that right. But they're just muddying the waters. They don't want to put a list together, because if they put a list together and said, okay, these are all of the men and or women that were accused by the victims, there'd be pandemonium, wouldn't we? We would demand every single person be jailed, hung in the public square, people that would have to resign or step down. A lot of people are stepping down voluntarily. They're kind of giving themselves up when maybe we wouldn't really know. And let's see here. She says it doesn't matter what Turning Point does. There will always be detractors. You got that right. And Sandy says, I agree 100%. Tony says, so be it. You got that right, Tony. So be it. Let's tear the government apart. I would actually look forward to it, quite honestly. If anybody knows me, I'm not a fan of Congress. Whether you're Republicans in Congress or Democrats in Congress, you're all there for the same purpose, except for maybe a tiny little handful. You're all there to steal our taxpayer money, fund your own pockets with it, and create your little NGOs to steal from us. And so, no, I don't care about Congress at all. Tim said, I'm glad that you are standing up and stepping up and speaking out. I believe that you speak the truth. You are doing a great job. Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate that. Jay says, sorry, agree to disagree. You absolutely cannot crash a government, especially ours, because the vultures like China would instantly swoop in, like it or not. Well, you're probably right, Jay, but I think we would get it together pretty quick. Now, I could be more faithful than what I need to be, but yeah, there's always somebody waiting in the wings, isn't it, to take over. And let's see here. Tony says Dan Bongino said Epstein killed himself. Exactly, Tony. I was just had this conversation with someone last night who asked me, a family member said, why is Dan Bongino, why did he step away from the government? I'm like, probably because he was tired of lying to us. I really do think I've never watched Dan Bongino's show ever. I know very little about him and the things he talks about. But what I can tell you is that he seems, based on things I've read, that he was a pretty upstanding person, that he cares about the truth. And that I really do think he, like maybe I would, or like you would, is you think, okay, here we have Donald Trump becoming our president. We fought so hard for this. God knows I did. And we fought so hard for this. And we finally got him a business person, running this country. To me, it's not about Donald Trump, the man. It's about the fact that he's running this country like a business. It's his policies, that I like. And so we get him into the chair, right? And then we think, okay, finally things are going to go the way we expect them to go. Everything is going to be fantastic. We're going to drain the swamp even more. We're going to have some accountability for all the things we know has taken place. Not we think, things we know have taken place. And then you're Dan Bongino, you joined the Trump administration because you think this is going to be so fantastic. Then you get in there, and then whoever it is that is giving him his orders, and quite honestly, I don't know who that is, whoever is giving him his orders is saying, hey, yeah, every single American knows, every single American knows that Epstein did not kill himself. Even the liberals I know say no, he didn't kill himself. And then Dan Bongino is forced to stand and face us and lie to our faces. And you could see from the video clips I've seen that he looked extremely uncomfortable. And when I saw that video clip of him doing that, I'm like, he's going to leave. We all did. It wasn't just me. We all said he's lying to us. He knows he's lying to us. He looks like he doesn't like lying to us. And it was just a matter of time before he stepped down. And that's where we are now. And let's see here. Lori says, I am a cynical person. That being said, I have a hard time believing that a huge population of entertainment and political people are eating babies and drinking blood. Me too, Lori. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this. I don't think it's a lot of people. I don't know. I don't know. I have denied that was even happening up until the past couple months. I was like, there's no way. I'm like, they might be doing some crazy stuff and having some crazy, P. Diddy parties, but nobody's eating babies. And I still don't know that they're eating babies. Maybe it's just like an inside joke. I don't know. But I think that there's more and more proof that these things are actually happening. But we also know, if you go back historically, all the way back to the very beginning of time, as far back as we can research, these things have always happened. So, why wouldn't they be happening now? If you really think about that, it's been happening since the beginning of time. So I don't know, but I don't think when we watch films or we listen to music that the vast majority is any part of this. I would assume they're probably as horrified by it as we are, but I don't know. Some people say, look at who was it that's recently been speaking out? Was it, I get some of these women mixed up. Is it Nicki Minaj? I believe has been speaking out, talking about this and making some pretty crazy posts on social media, calling out people for doing exactly that. But, Beyonce and Jay-Z or people that she has named. I don't know. I just don't know. But I'm with you, Lori. I'm extremely cynical when it comes to those things. I think who would do that? And I keep thinking nobody would do that. And Tony says, I no longer trust any of them. Neither do I, Tony. None of them. I like a couple people in Congress, but not many. I think they're all playing the game. Sorry, my little comment gripper is sometimes hard to grab onto. Patty, we're going to talk about you here in a few minutes. Patty says we need a list of the trans that have gone mad. Man, that would be a long list. Tony says, replying to Lori, did you ever look or study the Podesta emails? Yeah, it's pretty bad. And the artwork is even worse. He has said he was only working for the president for a year and his year was up. Oh yeah, Bongino. Maybe that's what it was. I don't know. I have a feeling, in my opinion, that he hated lying to Americans. Maybe he liked lying to Americans. I don't know. Patty says, why would Bongino lie? Well, Patty, when you're in a government position, and you if they tell you to lie, you have to lie. Very bad things will happen to you if you don't do what you're told. You would probably be fired, publicly humiliated. And also you have to remember that there's a lot of things that going on. It's kind of the ugly part of government is that sometimes the government lies to us for our own benefit or what they think is our own benefit. We may not agree, but it's that lie they tell you for the betterment of the entire country, kind of like what Jay said. They don't want the entire government to fall apart. If we found out that really Epstein was part of this big, maybe Israeli enterprise, what they called that honeypot type scheme to get the goods on all of these different leaders, not only in the United States, but across the world. And we found out how many members of our government was actually involved in that situation and dirt that Epstein dug up on them. It would probably tear our government apart. And just like Jay said, that would make us weak. We'd have China swoop in or somebody else, and then we're really going to have problems. So I do think sometimes they lie to us for the better good of our national security. We may not agree with it, but I know there's a lot of things the government has to do. I'm not going to, one day, someday, we'll get back down into 9/11 again, because that was the same scenario. There was a lot of lies that day told to Americans for not so much for our national security. To some degree it was, but more so just so that we don't know what the government is really capable of doing when they're put in a spot where they have to protect, let's say, something like the White House. And I'm talking about Flight 93, but we'll get into that another day. Glenn says Bongino is back at the #1 streaming podcast. Exactly, Glenn. That's probably where he belongs. Tim says, do you know that Roseanne knows what she's talking about eating babies or drinking? I don't know. I would think she's probably seen it from the inside. Pam says Bongino really did look like he was uncomfortable. I agree. Good morning, Larry. Good to see you this morning. And Patty, we're going to have to talk about this. Yesterday, there was a shooting, and this was in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And it was a high school hockey game. And, I've been very embroiled in the world of hockey. I volunteer at some various hockey organizations. I know a lot of, professional hockey players, and I, have done a lot of different, worked a lot of different events or attended a lot of events with these people. And the hockey community is very peaceful. There's not a lot going on, And so when I saw this headline yesterday, a couple of my hockey friends even messaged me about it. They're like, are you going to talk about this? And I'm like, man, the world must be really bad. It must be really bad if you are seeing a shooting at a hockey game. And then it turns out that the shooter was actually a trans person. It was a man. His name was Robert Dorgan. I want to make sure I have that right. Robert Dorgan. And he went by Roberto Esposito. Now, he is a father. He has 3 children. And I'm kind of unsure about the situation with his wife. And I heard it was his wife. Some people said they were estranged, but still married. I don't really know the full story. But what I did hear, earliest report said a man came in dressed like a woman and went over and shot his family, shot his wife. He shot at his kids, and then they had a family friend who he also shot at. Now, I haven't heard, I've looked and looked and looked this morning, and maybe you found it and I can't. But I know that he turned the gun on himself and killed himself. His wife, ex-wife, I'm not sure where her standing was. She was killed. Now another person though also passed away, and I don't know who that person is. If it's one of his children, if it was the family friend. I scoured the internets this morning looking for that information, and I couldn't find it. But a total of, besides he and himself, one other person was killed, and then 2 others I hear were injured, which I assume were members of his family or somebody caught in the crossfire. Tony says it's hard to believe because we don't think like that. I was naive until I studied the Podesta emails. I can't even imagine, Tony. I really can't. Good morning, Josh. And let's say yes. Good morning, Patriots. He said, God bless the USA. You got that right, Josh. And Larry said, where did that happen? That was in Pawtucket, Rhode Island. It's very near the town of Providence. And so now a lot of other information is coming out about Robert Dorgan. Now, the day before, his children, or at least a child of his, has spoken out in the past few hours, and they said that he was mentally ill and that he was spiraling out of control, and that I don't know when all of the trans stuff started. I think it was fairly recent from what I'm understanding. And that he had told he got in a fight with his family the day before. I don't know which family members. And he had explained, he was arguing with, I think, his wife or ex wife, whatever her position was. And he was saying that, hey, he was going to go berserk. That's the word he used, berserk. And because he didn't feel that Americans were honoring trans rights in the way that they should. And he said that people need to understand that if you tell a man who is trans, and of course he is Roberta Esposito, so if you come at a trans person and you say, okay, you're not really Roberto Esposito, you're really Robert Dorgan, that they have every right to go crazy. And he said he was losing his mind over people not recognizing him as a female. And I think that this goes back to a lot of the conversations we've had in the past when it comes to this anger and aggression in the trans community. And I do want to make it very clear that I have come into contact with trans people. I have a niece that's trans, and they're not all trans people are angry, and not all of them have this mental instability. And a lot of you will disagree with me on that, and you'll say, well, trans is mental instability. And you're certainly, welcome to your own opinion, of course. But there's a lot of trans people in this country who would never commit a violent act. And then, last week we talked about SSRIs a little bit. We didn't talk about as much as I want, these serotonin uptake inhibitors that a lot of people take who are feeling, a lot of times you go to a therapist and they're saying, all right, you've got this disorder, let's give you these SSRIs. And I think there's a lot of proof, and I don't know if Robert Dorgan is taking an SSRI, by the way, but there's a very good chance he probably does. And that's one of the common things when you're going in and you're getting these transgender surgeries. It's one of the common prescriptions that you're getting. But I will tell you, there certainly is a lot of anger in that movement. Patty, the reason why I'm bringing up Patty is because Patty, stated yesterday that her 14-year-old, Patty, is it your grandson? Her 14-year-old grandson lives in that area, and he actually skates at that rink. And he's, of course, absolutely terrified and heartbroken over the situation, as we would all understand, of course. Now, Patty says it's been reported that a man tackled the shooter. That's when the shooter took his second gun and shot himself in the head. Will the hero be charged for assault and causing the shooter to kill himself? Well, Patty, I had not heard that. So that's new information that I had not heard. And what a hero, that man was, because clearly this Robert Dorgan probably would have continued to shoot. He probably would have made sure he killed all of his children because he didn't feel that his wife and children were accepting him as Roberto Esposito, which is why he, had lashed out at them in the way that he did, according to, one of his surviving children. And thank you, Patty. It was her grandson. Tony says, we have one in Washington, Missouri, obviously mentally ill. And then and back to Patty's statement, Patty, if this guy tackled the shooter, no, even though the shooter took out another gun and shot himself, no. This person who tackled Robert Dorgan, Roberto Esposito, absolutely would be a hero, because I'm sure they saved a lot of lives by doing so. So no, they're not going to be charged, even though that area, is pretty liberal. I'm not sure, how their crime statistics are, anything else. It's a fairly nice area from what I understand. But that person, as far as I could imagine, would never be charged. They would be considered a hero. They stopped this person from shooting probably many other people, and certainly from him killing his children and their family friend. So I would consider that person certainly to be a hero. And Glenn says Klinger on MASH wasn't mentally unstable. We on this show, we've talked a lot about a lot of these shootings. There was just one not too long ago. Was it Jesse Strang, I believe was her name, who went into that school, Tumblr elementary school, secondary school in Alberta? Was that Alberta or British? No, it was British Columbia, Canada, and conducted a mass shooting. And it was the same situation. And the way I feel about this is only my opinion. I'm not a medical professional. This is only my opinion. Is I feel like where this anger comes from is in the same situation. This is a perfect example, is this Robert Dorgan. Robert Dorgan was born a man, but he viewed himself, and I don't know how long he viewed himself this way, but he felt like a woman, and he believed he was a woman, and he changed his name. He was going through this transitioning period. He changed his name to Roberta Esposito. And the problem was with him, and trust me, this is across the board, not all trans, but all of these trans people who we see are acting out aggressively and who have committed some of these big shootings. It's all the same situation. It's all the same common theory, is that they are upset that the world does not see them as they see themselves. And it's a very difficult situation. I was watching a video not long ago. It was another trans person who was born a man, transitioned to a female, and they were saying that, I am angry because you, the world, don't see me how I see myself. I see myself as this beautiful woman, but when you look at me, you just see me like a man dressed like a woman. You're never going to understand me or accept me. Therefore, I hate all of you, and I think you should all die. And that's exactly the mentality. It's terrifying to me. Should be terrifying to all of us, quite honestly. And let's see here. Oh, good morning, Jeannie. And so I think that that's why we're seeing a lot of these anger issues. It's people who want to be accepted as a certain way. They're not getting accepted in the way that they want to be accepted. And maybe, there's probably some people in their life that do accept them. But, I think it's a mindset where I feel like this person, but nobody else sees me, nobody else can relate to me. And I think that they feel like they're kind of left alone on an island, and their anger just continues to build up, continues to build up. And like he said, he was very upset because people didn't recognize trans rights. He again warned his family he was going to go berserk if they didn't accept him as Roberto Esposito, if the world didn't see him as a woman. So I think we can, and Jeannie says mental illness. Yes, it is mental illness. I'm not saying every trans person has mental illness, but I am certainly saying that that people like Robert Dorgan absolutely are mentally ill. Anyone who goes out and commits a mass shooting because they feel all of this pent up anger because either people tried to change them, like we saw in the Christian school shooting in Nashville, or because people don't view them in the way they want to be viewed. Therefore, they hate you to the extreme where they want to go out and take your life. They want to take you out of this world because you don't view them as they want you to be viewed. So it's a real problem. It is mental illness. And maybe it's a side effect of some of the medication, the hormones, because most of the people who have committed these different types of crimes, not all of them, most of them have been on medication, hormones, SSRIs, and other things. So it could be a balance of a lot of these different things. And Carl says, new info. Oh, Carl, please do share with us. Good morning, Scott. And Jeannie says, yes, they do. It is a mental illness. Carl says there's new information on the Zorro Ranch. Carl, please feel free to post it when you see it, because I would be very interested in seeing that. In the meantime, while Carl's posting, Carl says cooperation with investigations. The Hafiz family has stated that they will cooperate with any law enforcement investigations related to the property, which had previously been linked to serious allegations surrounding Epstein. Well, there you go. I guess we just said we're going to have our answer in a couple days. Was Don Hafiz, did he purchase the property to expose Epstein, or did he purchase the property to hide everything Epstein did? And if Carl is correct, if the news is correct, then there you go. He is going to cooperate, even though he did say earlier he was not going to cooperate. Apparently he is going to cooperate. So we'll see. And trust me, I can promise you, I will keep you up to date with what happens with that Zorro Ranch investigation, because I am going to be all over that. That's for sure. Because, there's a lot of information that can be told there. And let's see here. Patty says, I'm petrified of the trans group. Now I can't help it. My 14-year-old grandson and his friends we're all petrified too. I get it, Patty, because what your grandson, that's so close to home, place where he plays hockey and a familiar place to him. And he's going to have PTSD now. He and his friends are going to have a very difficult time playing hockey there. As a matter of fact, you know what? Before we move on, I don't know why I didn't show this, but I have the video of it right here. This is the far right. You can see the people kind of gathering. You look where he's at down there. Think about this: high school hockey players out there on the rink, not sure what to do or where to go. And I think, you know what, Patty, to your comment, I think you can see maybe when he was tackled. I tried to look at this video early, but I didn't really understand what was going on. Here, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So look far, far to the right, all the way over to the right. That's where the shooting occurred. And then you hear the pause. This must be when he gets maybe tackled, and then you hear one more gunshot. Hear that last gunshot. That is when he took his own life. Just a horrific situation. These kids are all going to have PTSD, no question about it. Glenn says Tumbler Ridge shooter was transgender. Annunciation Catholic Church shooter identified as trans. Nashville Christian shooter identified as trans. Lakewood Church shooter identified as trans. Colorado Spring shooter identified as non-binary. Denver shooter identified as trans. Aberdeen shooter identified as trans. Iowa high school shooter. Let's see here. Trans activist Charlie Kirk's assassin Tyler Robinson had a furry obsession and lived with a transgender. You got that right, Glenn. Let me see. I got to grab my little comments here. I don't know why. I need to get a better grabber. And Carl says, the current plans for Zorro Ranch, now renamed San Rafael Ranch, much better name, involve its transformation into a Christian retreat. I'm not sure if that's the appropriate setting for a Christian retreat, but we'll see. Don Huffines, the new owner and a Texas businessman and GOP politician, announced this transition recently. He expressed a vision to reclaim the property, stating, what the enemy once meant for evil, God can redeem for good. The family aims to instill a spiritual mission in the ranch, including signage at the entrance reflecting his aim. Now, see, Carl, I'm glad you posted that. I feel so much better about this situation now. And he's got a point, that yes. And I really like that statement. Let me see. I'm going to reread that. What the enemy once meant for evil, God can redeem for good. That's a really good saying there. I really like that. And I'm so thankful to hear this, because I was really back and forth about this the past couple of days, because I'm like, why did he originally say he wouldn't allow the investigation to occur? And then, of course, New Mexico really jumping into the ring saying, no, we are going to investigate what took place on the Zorro Ranch. And I'm glad to see now, and who knows, maybe that was misinformation that had been reported about him saying that, no, he didn't want to cooperate with an investigation. So I am very glad he is on the side of good and against the side of evil. That's for sure. Now, back, Glenn, to your point about these shooters, I'm sure you recall, what was there was a shooter who was at a grocery store. That was one of them. There was another shooter who was at one of the Christian schools. Both of them had one thing in common. On their weapon, they had a trans power sticker. Do you remember that? I know a lot of us looked at it at the time. I don't know what show I was on at the time. I just can't recall. I think it was prior. One was prior to me having this podcast, and one was after I had the podcast. And I remember showing up close pictures. I got banned on Facebook. I got put in Facebook jail for showing it. But he had those little pink trans power stickers on their weapons. And it's I'm not saying, again, I try to be very careful. I feel like people need to live their own lives. It's not up to me to judge another person for how you live. If you're trans, if you're gay, if you're whatever the situation might be, that's not up for me to judge you. There's a lot of people out there who really judge people harshly, and they'll say, oh, if you're gay, you're going to go to hell because the Bible says you can't be gay. I'm not going to be that person to say that. I know a lot of people who are gay who are very good people. And I know a lot of, a couple, I don't know many trans people, but I've met a couple who are, seem like really good people as well. And a lot of these people are very much conservative. They are Christian. They follow the Bible. And I don't want to blame anybody for their lifestyle. Whatever you choose to do is, to me, if somebody's not hurting children, they should be able to live their life any way they want to live their life. And people get upset with me for saying that, because I feel like I'm not here to judge. I can't tell you how many people have told me that it is our I'm trying to think of the right word here. It is our duty to judge people who go against Christianity. And I don't agree with that. I absolutely do not agree with that. It is not my place to judge, because the way I see it is none of us are perfect. We are all sinners. Therefore, and whoever said, did God ever say that one sin is greater than another sin for people who think some of people's actions are sinful? I don't think so. A friend of mine, one time we had a big argument about this. In fact, we're not even friends anymore because of this argument. And this was a girlfriend of mine, and I can't remember what it was we argued about, but we had two different friends, and one friend was in a relationship with one guy for many years, and this guy was not yet divorced. And so I was on the side of, I said to this, about that friend, I said, well, he and his wife are not together anymore. Yes, they are technically married, so yes, it is technically a sin. But then this other friend we had, she wasn't seeing a guy, that she was seeing multiple men. It was like every weekend we'd go out, she'd end up with a different guy, but she was very Christian, but she would always end up with going home with all these different men. And I know this is probably more information should be telling you guys all. And I don't talk to either of these girls anymore, but the friend and I had this conversation: who was the bigger sinner? Which is always an interesting conversation when it comes to who is the bigger sinner. And in my opinion, I said, I don't feel like I'm in a position to judge either person. She said, well, yeah, well, this girl's, going home with all these different men, but that's not against religion. I'm like, well, fornication is actually a sin. It doesn't matter who or what, it is actually a sin. And yes, this other girl, you could say she's sinning too, because she is having a relationship with somebody who's not officially divorced. But, as I stated to her, who are we to judge what sin is greater than the other sin? And I don't recall anybody ever reading to me or telling me that God said one sin was a greater sin than another sin. So I think we as Christians have no right to judge other people, because guess what? We are all sinners. Please tell me somebody who is not a sinner. I would love to know who that person is. Pam says it's all hormones and medication they are on. Glenn says Thomas Crooks. That's right, Thomas Crooks. I don't know why. Well, Thomas Crooks. He was the Butler, Pennsylvania. He attempted to assassinate Donald Trump. And if you ever want to go down a rabbit hole, that's a rabbit hole we'll go down someday, because I know a lot about that situation, and we are definitely not told what really happened. Carl says the Huffington family plans to coincide with the local legislative actions, as the New Mexico House of Representatives has initiated a truth commission to investigate past activities at the ranch, particularly regarding allegations of criminal behavior associated with Jeffrey Epstein. And then let's see here. Jeannie says, my daughter got depressed during COVID after a long battle with meds. I had her hormones tested, and come to find out she had a cyst on her ovaries. Isn't that interesting? How our bodies really, a lot of people think that you have different illnesses and your body doesn't react mentally, or it doesn't affect your hormones and different things, but it does. I remember when I was young, junior high, high school, I remember every once in a while there'd be a kid that would just not be at school anymore. And you'd hear, well, they were chemically imbalanced. Do you remember that term? Chemically imbalanced. And they would take them out of school, treat them for whatever. Sometimes they'd come back, sometimes they wouldn't. And at the time, I really just didn't understand, chemically imbalanced. Now, as an adult, I get it. There are sometimes, I was just reading yesterday, I'm not going to go down this road today. We can talk about that another day. It has nothing to do with mental health, but that in time, human, maybe it's our food and the fact that we eat all these processed food, maybe it's chemicals in our water, but there are different types of chemicals or hormones that were in our bodies from the beginning of time that now we no longer have. For whatever reason, our bodies no longer are getting these different minerals. They're not getting these different things. Our DNA has changed because of this, and that they think a lot of the problem now with a lot of the mental health issues, a lot of other hormonal problems people are having, is just that our diets over time have eventually changed our DNA completely. And they've changed the composition of our bodies and these different cells in our bodies, and in that you can go back and supplement, and it'll make a huge difference with these different things. So to me, that's what I feel like maybe a chemical imbalance is that a person is just missing something for some reason that they should have, and then they can supplement it and get back to the whole person that they should be. That's just my own theory. And Carl says the above Zorro info was copy and pasted. Thank you, Carl. I appreciate that information. Pam says, you do you, boo. That's exactly how I feel too. Exactly. Pam, everybody has their right to live any way they want to live, as long as you're not eating children or abusing children. Patty says, what happened to the doctor's oath? First, do no harm. Doctors and therapists have to be sued to stop the madness. We have the proof. Some go mad and murder. Oh, there's no question about it, Patty. How much money? I think that we should ban doctors or any healthcare providers for Colonel Adams says Carl is a sinner. Sorry, I'm going to try not to laugh. I'll start coughing if I do. And once I start coughing, see what I mean? Colonel Adams, don't do that to me. If I start coughing, I'll have a hard time stopping. And so yes, doctors, in my opinion, they should be banned from ever receiving payments for giving certain medications, payments for giving certain types of performing certain types of surgery. Because to me, if they're motivated by money, and there's a lot of doctors out there who are not motivated by that money. Trust me, I have a fantastic doctor who I don't think would ever be motivated by money. He uses the most basic stuff at every turn. But there are doctors who we know are motivated by money. We certainly saw that during COVID. They should certainly ban that practice. Patty says, how do teachers feel after yet another trans shooting while they're helping their students transition? I know, Patty, it's a crazy situation, isn't it? That's why you just have to always know what's going on with your children and with your family. And let's see here. And okay, so let's move on from that. What I wanted to show you a really quick video, and I'm this kind of goes, in my opinion, along with mental illness. I've got a video of a white woman, because as we know, trust me, when I was on Cancel This, we talked about this subject quite a bit. We have a lot of schools out there telling adults, hey, if you're white, you should be ashamed. You are responsible for all the badness in the world. Everything that's ever happened that's bad in this country is because of you, white person. You should be ashamed of your skin color. Now, obviously, I don't agree with that. I think that there's nothing wrong with being proud to be white. Now, that would be seen as a very racist statement. There's nothing, if you have dark skin, if you're a black person, you should be proud to be black. If you're Hispanic, you should be proud to be Hispanic. Whatever your heritage or whatever the color of your skin is, you should always be proud to be you, right? That's all it is to me. It's not about skin color. You should just always be proud to be you, whatever your skin color might be. But there are people out there who are getting brainwashed, in my opinion, to say, it used to be the white man. Remember, I used to say was at the bottom of the barrel. Now it's just white people in general. And I have this video of this lady, and she says, she obviously hates her whiteness and she refuses to date white men. And when I saw this video, I thought it was hilarious. Let's see.
Friendly reminder, as a white American woman, I will no longer be dating white men. I'm looking for anything other than a white man, okay?
Because white men are so bad. If you're white, you should be so ashamed of your color, right? I don't understand why it is racist to say, I am a white person. I'm proud of myself and who I am. My color doesn't have anything to do with it. I just happen to be born with white skin, and it's always so weird to me that it's so strange to me that people divide themselves up by skin color. I grew up in the Chicago area, and some of you did as well. And when I was growing up, we never talked about skin color. Not one time. I went to school. Our schools in Chicago are very diverse. And I remember I had friends of every shade imaginable, from very dark to very, very pale light colored, almost translucent, every shade imaginable. I had friends that were every religion imaginable, who come from different areas, literally anywhere you could possibly imagine. In Chicago, it really is that big melting pool of people from all over the world, that come together, all the religions. And I don't remember ever even one time having a conversation or even thinking in my head that this person is different from me because of their religion, or different from me because of their skin color, or different from me for whatever reasons. Now, there were some friends who had stricter rules than me because of their religion, but it was never once ever brought up about color. We just all hung out and had a good time. It's the strangest thing to me that people divide themselves by the color of their skin. It's like my brain cannot wrap itself around that concept. It's really strange to me. And Josh says, I am proud to be a white male from the United States of America. You know what, Josh? And you should be. And I've said for a long time, it's the white man has been at the bottom of the barrel for a really long time. And how that used to be is that minorities, whether you're a woman, of a white or of color woman, you're always going to be treated better than men. You're going to have opportunities for loans. You're going to have those, opportunities for women-owned business loans and a lot of different benefits that go with that. different types of grants for school because you're a woman. If you're a person of color, again, a lot of different loans are given to minorities, different types of school grants and so on, aimed towards minority. But what goes to, you're just your typical white man? That is nothing. If you're just a white man, you fit no minority status at all, and you get nothing. And things have gone so much further since I used to talk about that. Glenn says Cruella DeVille. And Carl says, you sent me some information. I will check that. And Jay says, white men are pretty thrilled. I'm sure they are. I don't think there's anybody lining up at her door, that's for sure. And let's see. Pam says, what the F is wrong with her? Give me a break. I'm telling you. And let me see sometimes I can't hit my little thing here. Patty says, remember playing the game Eeny, Meeny, Miny, Mo? We had no idea what we were seeing. My parents stopped it ASAP. Yeah, we never played that game or never had that word in it. Again, maybe just being in a different place. So I had my grandpa. I kind of joke about this once in a while. Maybe it's nothing to joke about. He was very old school, and I can remember him not at all. Now he is from St. Louis. St. Louis has always been and I'm not trying to be mean by this, but it's always been a little bit more, I don't want to say racist, because racism and prejudice are totally separate things. But I think there's more prejudice people in the St. Louis area than what I grew up with in the Chicago area. My grandfather was from middle Missouri, Crawford County, Missouri. And of course, me growing up in Chicago had a different upbringing. But I remember my grandpa would say things sometimes, and I'd be like, oh my gosh. And I can remember him being worried about Black people, moving into his neighborhood. But then, I think that, and he hated the Japanese too, because he was in World War II. And I remember when, gosh, what was it that happened? I remember when he was at work, he met a guy, and I think the guy's name was Willie. He was a Black man that he worked with. And I'll tell you what, he got to know that guy and he loved that man. And I think that changed his entire opinion about everything. And I think that's just one of those things that the old school was kind of more of an old school type thing. All right. So one of the other things I wanted to talk about is, let's see here. We already talked about pretty much everything. Oh, you know what? I think I have covered. Oh, no. One thing I want to talk about was this scientist testing that Havana Syndrome. Because, as we know, a lot of us are familiar with what Havana Syndrome is. And sorry, you guys threw me off with that eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I'm trying to get myself back together. So we talked about Cuba, obviously, many times, and some of our United States officials going to Cuba and coming down with this Havana Syndrome. And what that was is we had some people who are different officials, FBI agents, Secret Service, etc., over in Cuba, and they would become very ill. They would have loud ringing in their ears. They would collapse. Some of them did suffer brain damage, and they had termed it Havana Syndrome. And now there are different, of course, we know that this is actually a weapon. In fact, it's a weapon that we, the United States, do have. And I don't know if Cuba had it first, if we had it first. I don't really know how that played out in Cuba, but they do call it Havana Syndrome because that's when it was first noticed over in Cuba. And we heard when in Venezuela, when the United States troops went in and took out Maduro, brought him back to the United States, you heard those people on the ground talking about what I believe was that weapon that was used. And they also had ear-piercing pain. Some of them said they had nosebleeds. Some of them said their ears were bleeding. And I do believe it's the same type of weapon. And of course, every country is certainly running around trying to copy, what we have, what other people have. And I want to go back because I want to make sure I tell you exactly what type of weapon it is that we're talking about here. And so there's a Norwegian government scientist. Now, he is unnamed. They don't want to say who he is, but he is trying to create a weapon. It's called a pulsed energy weapon. So that's what Havana Syndrome is. It is caused by a pulsed energy weapon. And he was experimenting in his office trying to create a pulsed energy weapon for the Norwegian government. And when he did so, and when he was testing it, he ended up suffering severe brain damage. And I thought that was pretty wild when you think about technology and how technology is moving. And I do believe we use one of these pulsed energy weapons in Venezuela. And I think that's a good warning, maybe to some of the other folks out there who would like to do us some harm, that we do have the ability to use these pulsed energy weapons. And of course, a lot of these other countries are going to develop them, and they're going to use them against us. And Josh says, what do you think about the Erica Kirk? Let me go back up. We just talked about Erica Kirk a few minutes ago, Josh. Let's see. Leanne says, the only forgivable sin is blasphemy against God. And Matthew, I was like, I knew I read that wrong. Leanne says, the only unforgivable sin is blasphemy against God. Matthew 12, 31, 32. Then, of course, the Bible mentions the 8 deadly sins, which lead to greater sins. And Leanne, I have to agree with you there. And Carl says, no, he doesn't. Kind of crap bothers me when I hear it. I'm not sure what you're talking about, Carl. And let's see here. Josh says, what do you think about the Erica Kirk text messages that were uncovered? I'm not sure. I guess, you know what? I guess I don't know about those text messages, Josh. Please send that to me. I don't know anything about Erica Kirk text messages that were uncovered. Patty said, I saw the hundreds of flagpoles in Cuba. Yeah, Donald Trump, mentioned Cuba. I saw some news early this morning that said we're in negotiation, we're in talks. He feels that we can work this out with Cuba diplomatically, and that we will soon see Cubans able to come to the United States to see their family. And Glenn says, yes, tell Trump to quit talking about it. I know. And Patty says, could Nancy be placed on the Epstein ranch? Could Nancy be placed on the Epstein ranch? I don't think so, Patty. Here in a few minutes, we're going to talk about the Nancy Guthrie case and any updates. I don't think that her disappearance has anything to do with the Clintons or Epstein or any of the other things. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, what some new information that's coming out. One last thing I wanted to jump in about is Josh said, Patty, look up Candace Owens' past 2 videos on YouTube. Yeah, Candace Owens is another one. I know some people from Turning Point are really going at her right now. I don't really know what's going on, since I don't watch any of these people's podcasts, and I'm so busy worrying about other stuff. I've not caught up with Candace Owens or Erica Kirk or anyone else, but I know there's a lot of stuff going on out there, a lot of he said, she said, and different things like that. And I used to really like Candace Owens, and then a lot of people said, well, she went off the deep end. When that happens and you say, well, somebody went off the deep end, you got to really think about it. Are they telling the truth? Or have they really gone off the deep end? If somebody has been consistent, and I don't know enough about Candace Owens to know if she has been, but if she's always been consistent, and then all of a sudden you think she's telling these loopy stories, maybe she's telling the truth and they truly are just loopy but crazy stories. But if she's never been consistent, then she probably is not quite accurate at this time either. So I don't know enough about her to pass that judgment. But what I do want to talk about really quick also is what's going on with Iran, because that situation is escalating very quickly. It is very clear at this point that we are not going to come up with a diplomatic solution. It is very clear. We have the Ayatollah Khomeini making direct threats, stating that he is going to make sure our aircraft carriers are at the bottom of the ocean. And in response to some of the threats, that was one of many threats that have been made against the United States. In response to that, I heard this morning, can't recall the number, it was either 47 or 48 jets have scrambled on their way out to the Middle East. And I think the situation is definitely escalating. I think that Trump has realized, and Netanyahu, there's going to be no peaceful transition of power here. And they're certainly not going to ever back down on their uranium enrichment. It's just not going to happen. And we tried diplomacy. Diplomacy did not work. In my opinion, we tried diplomacy far longer than what we should have. So now that we know the Ayatollah is making direct threats at our United States troops, at our aircraft carriers, at us Americans, I do think he's going to step up. Now, the Taliban has reaffirmed, like I said yesterday, once again, that the Taliban is going to support Iran in any way they can. Now, how they're going to support them, I do not know. Now, the Taliban has a lot of weapons. They really do. People don't often talk about what they have, but we left a lot of equipment there, as you know, in Afghanistan. They have a lot. There's some people talk about them having suitcase weapons. We know that they have biological weapons. How are they going to support Iran? I don't think the Taliban is going to threaten us directly, because we, the United States under Donald Trump's administration, have worked so well with the Taliban. I don't like it. I don't want us to work with the Taliban any more than I want us to work with Al Qaeda in Syria. But it is, apparently a decision Donald Trump has made that he thinks makes the country a better place, a more secure place for national security. So therefore, We just have to kind of go along with whatever his plan might be. I don't think the Taliban is going to directly threaten Americans. They've said they will support Iran in any way they can, which probably means within their country, where, hey, if we're going over there and we're carrying out airstrikes, will they shoot back at us? I don't know that the Taliban will, but I think the Taliban will probably give them weapons or, help them in some supportive way. I don't expect them to retaliate directly against the United States. They have far too much to lose if they do that. I don't expect that to happen, but I do expect something to happen with certainly with Iran over the next couple of days. Glenn says Candace is mentally ill. Glenn, I knew you were going to say that. Jeannie says, what's with the scary guy running TPUSA? Jeannie, I don't know what's going on over there at Turning Point. I really don't. I've said that before. I really have no idea. I don't keep up with it as much. I loved Charlie Kirk, and I see Turning Point more of as a super PAC. Now, Charlie Kirk ran it as a podcast. He went out all these different branches to different schools, and there was a lot more he put into it. But ultimately, if you get down to the center of things, Turning Point USA is a super PAC, and their goal is to affect elections, and their goal is to support various conservative Christian candidates and all over the United States and make sure that they win their seat in whatever office they're running for. So that is their primary goal. But everything else kind of ballooned out of that, where Charlie was going around and talking to students and trying to create more Christian conservatives. Of course, that was always his goal. And I hope that tradition continues. I really do. But I think it's one of those situations like we hear so often. There is no person to take the place of Charlie Kirk. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to play. I'm glad you guys brought it up because I almost forgot. I wanted to play a video of Charlie Kirk because I try to say this so often, and I know it doesn't come through very well. I know a lot of people get upset with me sometimes because I try to differentiate the difference between liberals and far leftists. I always try to I need a little video of myself or of Charlie saying this so that I play maybe once a day. But I always try to differentiate between the two because I know a lot of liberal people. You probably do too. I know a lot of Democrats. I know a lot of liberals who seem like very sane, normal people who absolutely do not, support aggression or violence towards law enforcement. We can talk and talk and talk about these different political ideologies, and we may not agree, but we will disagree. We will agree to disagree on these different topics, and it never comes to blows. It never gets heated. Some subjects we just don't talk about at all because I know that we're never going to agree. So it's like, why talk about it if we're never going to agree? But we're still friends. I have a lot of friends who are liberal. I work with a lot of liberal people, and we may not agree on these different topics, but we agree to disagree, and we move on, and we stay close and stay friends and all these other things. But then you have the people who are on the very far left. I call them the fringe far leftists. Those folks, there is absolutely no talking to. They will never agree to disagree. The way they feel is if you don't agree with them, then you should be exterminated. End of story. There is no agree to disagree when you get to that very, very far fringe left. And Charlie Kirk summed it up better than I ever could. And I hope I've got the right video clip here. I think I do. Let's see.
So there's a difference between liberals and leftists, okay? It's a very big difference. A liberal is someone I will disagree with, and we'll have a wonderful time. We'll go out to dinner, and we'll consider each other friends. A liberal is someone that might believe in gay marriage. They might believe in more accessible abortion. They might believe in higher taxes. A liberal will agree to disagree. A liberal will have the conversation, and they'll say, we might not agree on this, but I still treat you with respect. And I really like you as a person. A leftist will try to shut you up before you even open your mouth. A leftist does not believe in capitalism whatsoever. A leftist is rooted in intolerance. And you see this happen all over the place in America, where college campuses I get shouted down. You heard my message tonight. Do you think I'm a hateful speaker? Do you think I bring vitriol? I get labeled by groups on the left in America that I should not be allowed to speak on U.S. campuses. That I'm somehow spreading vitriol and hatred, and I'm spreading dangerous ideas.
So Charlie Kirk said it better than I ever could. There is a difference between people who are liberals and people who are on that far fringe left. The people on the far fringe left have no tolerance. They're not able to tolerate anything at all that would be Christian or conservative. They shut you down immediately. They don't want to hear it. They use violence, tactics. And And that is just like we were talking about the Pawtucket shooting earlier with Robert Dorman, Roberto Esposito. It's the same type of situation. I guarantee you that person belongs to that group on the far, far left. And these people, like he said, they don't believe in capitalism. I almost said cannibalism. They don't believe in capitalism. And they're anarchists is really what it comes down to. They're anarchists. And in that far, far left group, that's where you have your Antifa, you have your Revolutionary Communist Party folks, you have all on that very, very far left. And I used to call it the 2% on the far fringe left. I think now it's probably growing to about 5%. That community seems to be growing, but I had to throw that in there today because I always try to articulate that. I don't get it out as well as Charlie did. And I talk a lot about this show about liberals and Democrats and different things, but anything negative is always on that very, very far left. It really is. And Josh says, I have lost a lot of far left friends from California because I won't speak out against ICE and my support for Trump. I have lost friends, followers, everything you can think of over that exact same thing. Patty says, Prophet Julie Green said that J.D. Vance is one of the great white wolves. I'm not sure what that means, Patty. I'll have to look that up. And then Glenn says, TPUSA. You said TPUSA is out to get J.D. Vance elected. That's a good thing. And Jeannie says they picked someone that looks like evil. I don't know what's going on over there at TPUSA. And Jeannie says, so we have it backwards. The crazies are leftists and not liberals. I don't think backwards, but I do think that most liberals, now while a liberal person votes for policies that I do think harms our country, I think they vote for them. I think for the most part, liberals, if you say, hey, that person's a liberal, that person's a liberal, I don't think those are the group of people who's out there fighting ICE. They might be out protesting, but they're not the people out fighting ICE. They're going to be the peaceful or more peaceful protesters. And then you have that group that takes it just a step further. And they're the ones who are throwing bottles of ice literally at ICE. They're the ones throwing rocks and breaking windows and vandalizing and tearing those hotels apart. Some people consider them to be liberals, but really, and I've talked about this so many times on all the shows I've been on, in the past at least 10 years, those people are the anarchists. Most of those people, they do not vote either. They don't vote at all, or they vote, of course, they're going to vote for a liberal candidate. These are, a lot of them started out as the Bernie Sanders supporters. They're on that very, very far fringe left, and they don't care about any form of government. They're actually anti-government. So most of the time, they're not Democrats or Republicans. They're anti-government, anti-capitalist. They are absolutely anarchists. That's their goal, is total chaos and anarchy. And those are the people who are dangerous. People who are liberal, who just share a different political opinion than we do. I don't have a problem with those people. I don't agree with, some of the policies on that side of the fence, but I don't have a problem with people who are liberal or people who are Democrat. I have a real problem with the anarchists who are on that far fringe left, who are the ones who want to go out and create violence and don't respect law enforcement. Trust me, they don't respect you either. And there's some rough people over that way. All right, guys, what I want to talk about next, I'm just going to catch up. As always, I always go over my time limit. I do want to talk about the Nancy Guthrie case. I saved it for last because I know some of you don't care. Some people are tired of hearing about it. And I don't have a whole lot to say. Now, if there's been any updates since I've been on the show, I don't know of them. So just to kind of give some background again, Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, Savannah Guthrie's mother, who was apparently abducted from her home. That happened on the early morning of February 1st, around 2:30 a.m. And we've talked about this case. That was 17 days ago today. And the reason, I'm not going to go down that road, why this case is so popular, but it's based in public interest. People say, well, it's because it's Savannah Guthrie's mother. That probably lent to the population, population. I can't talk right today. Popular, making this topic so popular among social media. But it's more about social media algorithms. I went over that yesterday. I'm not going to talk about that again today. But the case has been in the news to some people's dismay. But there is some new information available. And some of that new information that I heard as of this morning is that investigators have narrowed down an area. There's an area just a couple miles from Nancy's home. If you're following the case, it's very close to that Chevron gas station in which they had thought that they spotted what could be a suspect vehicle. They went to that Chevron. There's a Circle K just right down the road. They went to both of those gas stations and they asked for surveillance video looking for a particular vehicle, which they did apparently spot. And we don't know what vehicle that was. There's been a lot of guessing games about what that could be, and no word on that. I just don't know. But that was something new. So they've expanded the search in this little area. It's about 2 to 3 miles around that Chevron gas station, where they're looking for neighbors to look at their surveillance cameras, pick up anything they might have. They're still looking at those suspects from that raid that took place on Friday night. Nowhere there. There's a lot of people. If you follow the case, you're probably seeing that. And oh, yeah, Jeannie says the most incompetent case ever. You got that right. We talked a lot about that yesterday, but yeah, a lot of bungling in that case. If they don't get a smoking gun, man, they're going to have a hard time getting a prosecution in that case with all the scene contamination that took place. And, speaking of scene contamination, of course, they have the glove. Now, here's the thing, and I think there's a lot of misnomers that's going around on social media. And we talked a little bit about this yesterday, but they found a glove. It was about 2 miles away from Nancy's home. The glove is a match, meaning that it looks like the glove that the suspect wore on Nancy's surveillance camera. That is the match that is being talked about. There is a match. The glove looks like the other glove. It could be the same kind of glove. Those gloves are fairly popular, so I don't necessarily expect it to be related to Nancy's abduction, but it could be, certainly worth checking out. And so that glove has been sent in to the lab in Florida. Now, a lot of people are saying, and I've seen some really big names even speculating about this, where they're saying, well, we don't know yet. It could be the DNA might match Nancy. It might match the suspect DNA they already have from the home, but we already know that it doesn't. And the reason why we know it doesn't is because the private lab in Florida, they analyzed all the other material. They already have the potential suspect DNA already on file at that lab. If you recall, investigators found an isolated DNA sample within Nancy's home. Now, from what I understand, that DNA sample is not a smoking gun. It was found in the home, not necessarily proving that that person is the person who abducted Nancy. So there's no smoking gun there, but there was DNA found. There was male DNA. It was not any family member of hers. It was somebody that they can't explain why this person would have been in the home. So that is one spot of DNA. Now, the lab in Florida already has the profile for that isolated piece of DNA. So when they took this glove in and they sent it into the private lab in Florida, and they took that glove and they tried to isolate that DNA, if that DNA from the glove was a match to the suspect DNA found in Nancy's home, then we would already know that's a match. Now, if Nancy's DNA was on that glove, we would already know, because they have a sample of Nancy's DNA profile, that Nancy's DNA was on that glove. So we know they found DNA on this glove, but that DNA does not match the suspect that was in Nancy's home, or not suspect necessarily, but that isolated DNA sample from Nancy's home. And it doesn't match Nancy's DNA, but they do have DNA. They're doing their finalization on that report, and then they're going to enter that DNA into CODIS and hope for a match. Now, when it comes to the DNA, they've probably already started this process, I'm assuming, on the DNA, the isolated DNA in Nancy's house. It doesn't cost very much. It's pretty cheap. Last time I checked, it was under $5,000. But I'm going to guess they're going to take both of these DNA samples. If they don't find anything in CODIS, they're going to go the genetic genealogy way. And you probably know how this works. It is, in my opinion, the most fantastic technology that's come across in my lifetime, quite honestly, is how I feel about it. And what they're going to do, and I remember the day they announced they could do this, which was fantastic. They're going to take that DNA, they're going to submit it to a genealogy website. Let's say 23andMe, just as an example, or GED Match, one of these two. Those are the two that usually cooperate with investigations. And they're going to submit that DNA sample. And then from there, what they're going to do is they're going to build a family tree. They're going to put the sample in. They're going to say, okay, this person is that person's grandmother, or this person, is historically related to this person. And they're going to keep narrowing that down by people who've already submitted DNA until they get a pretty good idea who this person is. And trust me, they are very good at doing this. Now that's not a given. If you don't have any family members who've ever submitted DNA, and this is a wide range. You have to remember, if you yourself, let's say, are the suspect and you left your DNA at a scene, and investigators take your DNA and they send it into GED Match or one of these other sites, if you have no family, no cousins, no distant cousins, no 3 times removed cousins, no one in your entire genetic line has ever submitted a sample, then they're probably not going to find you. But you could have a distant cousin that you've never heard of, never met, 5 times removed that submitted a DNA sample to one of these sites. And guess what? That's going to hone in on you. And so I am very confident that they are probably going to find, at least they're going to find who owns these 2 samples. One person for the sample found in Nancy's home, another person, for that glove. Now, will we come up with anything? That doesn't mean anything. The person who left that DNA sample in Nancy's home, and I do think it's touch DNA that they found in Nancy's home. I don't think it's anything other than touch DNA. The lab in Florida, their specialty is touch DNA, and I do think that's why Pima County used that particular lab, is because they have touch DNA. And if that sample was not the smoking gun, it could be anything. It could be somebody who came into the house for to look at the electric, or to who knows what, just some random person. But they'll at least find out who that person is. I'm pretty confident of that. Then they're going to go back and try to say, okay, why were you in Nancy's house? Why do we have your DNA? And we don't know. It could have been on a can. Maybe somebody at the grocery store, she bought a can of soda, and there was a fingerprint on that can of soda, and it turns out to be a grocery store worker. I mean, there was a case, you remember, as a matter of fact, it was the John Bonet case, if you recall. There was DNA on John Bonet's underpants. Well, they went through all these DNA matches, and it turns out it was somebody who worked in the factory that manufactured those underpants, like in Cambodia or somewhere. So there's a lot of places DNA can come from. So we're still waiting DNA results. Now, one of the big stories people are talking about right now, and Josh, if you're still listening, I know you know this, is a lot of people have believed that a family member of Nancy is responsible for her abduction. And they said yesterday, Pima County said, and this is a weird twist too, Pima County released a statement, and they said they have cleared. Now, this is the first time they've used the word cleared in the, excuse me, in this investigation. They said they cleared her immediate family, which would be Savannah's husband, and their spouses. So Savannah and her husband, Annie and her husband Tommaso, and her brother Cameron and his wife, I don't know her name. Those people allegedly have been cleared. These other people have been cleared. Now, extended family has not yet been cleared, but those people have been cleared. And the search the other day, a lot of people are, and I haven't looked at this. I've seen the post. I don't like to talk about people and say somebody's guilty of doing something when I don't know. But there is a lot of online rumor that Nancy's, and I'm trying to say this the correct way, Nancy's sister-in-law, that would be Nancy's deceased husband, had a sister named Penny. And a lot of people are trying to say that Penny's daughter, so this would be Nancy's niece by marriage, is the person responsible, and that she is tied to the raid that happened on Friday. Now, I don't know the circumstances. I don't know if any of that's true. Her name is Kayla. And a lot of Kayla, is it Daly? Was that her name? Or Kayla? I can't remember. Kayla something or another. And so Kayla was taken into custody on February the 12th. And the raid, of course, happened on Friday. So a lot of people are saying, and right now I'm just talking about hearsay. These are not facts. All of this is just hearsay. That's it. Just rumor, just hearsay, not facts. But a lot of people online have kind of taken this and run with it. And they said that this Kayla was picked up. She was jailed on February the 12th. I can't remember what it was she was jailed over. Probably something that was, fairly minor from what I recall. And her boyfriend, his name is Lucas Daly. And we can talk about his name because he is the person that was detained by police on Friday, one of the 3 men that were detained. And so therefore, he is the person who allegedly owns the Range Rover that was such a focus of the investigation. He is allegedly her boyfriend. So a lot of people are saying, well, it's connected. Now, we don't know, of course, that any of that is connected. They have taken potential suspect DNA from that home they raided on Friday. Those results, as far as I know, have not come back yet. So we'll see what the match, we'll see if they, come up with some other reasons. But then there's a lot of people talking about, well, it could be a burglary that went wrong. We talked about that yesterday. I don't know many burglaries that go wrong in which they remove a body from the scene. But I mean, there's certainly a possibility that someone could have panicked and somebody, did harm Nancy, whether, harmed her slightly or harmed her a lot. We certainly wouldn't know. And maybe they panicked and took her. That doesn't normally happen. Usually people panic and leave, but you just don't know what's always on the mind of someone. So that possibility is already there Carl says he's got to go. Carl, you have a good day too. And so there's a lot going on. That's a couple of the possibilities there. Outside of them continuing the search for Nancy, they use that sniffer to try. We talked about that yesterday to try to pick up her pacemaker signal. Her pacemaker should still be signaling wherever she may be. I do think investigators think she's close. Now, I don't know why. I don't know what. There's probably some type of evidence they have that tells them that Nancy is close, and because they seem to be just focusing on that area around her home, they don't seem to be looking further out, which kind of lends more to the theory that this person could potentially have been on foot, which I believe from day one they're looking at somebody who was on foot. I don't know, but that's what I'm guessing. They were talking to a lot of neighbors about, hey, have you seen anybody walking, a male walking in this area? And before they were kind of focusing on the area between Nancy's house and Annie's house, but it turns out that this house they raided was right by Annie's house. So that would make a lot of sense why it wouldn't be Annie and her husband, but yet it could be somebody who lives near her. And that's why they had that focus, between the two houses, is really they're looking at somebody who could be a potential neighbor of Annie and probably unrelated to Annie and her husband at all. So that's one other direction. Savannah, of course, released another video yesterday. I'm not going to play that. I don't know why they keep, quoting movies. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. But we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, and we shouldn't. We know way more about this investigation than we should know, quite honestly. Way more than has been given out in any other case I've really looked at. And it's very good possibility that Savannah and her family have been communicating with somebody who claims they're a kidnapper outside of the new note that came into TMZ. I would really like to see TMZ stay out of everything. If TMZ thinks they're getting a valid message from a person who abducted Nancy, they need to keep it to themselves. They need to report it to the FBI and to Pima County, maybe the family, but don't tell the public. But of course, they're doing that because there's getting views, it's sensationalism and so on. And, those are really the new things. I know that investigators have been going out. They had a list of 40, I think it was 40 different photos of potential suspects. They were going around to gun shops in the area asking, hey, have you seen any of these people in your gun shop? But that's very common investigation tactics. That's very normal. They're going to be going to all the Walmarts where they've identified that the mask and the backpack were purchased at. They don't know which Walmart, but Walmart categorizes everything. If you go and you purchase a banana today at Walmart, guess what? Walmart knows you purchased that banana. They know what day you purchased it and what time you purchased it. They've got a huge computer system that calculates all of that. And investigators will go to those Walmarts if they see that a backpack, let's say, or that mask was purchased in store, has to be purchased in store, they're going to be able to go back and potentially find video of that person that purchased those items. So that's one way. Kim says, as dramatic as this whole ordeal has been, it's hard to stop believing the family has cleared and not been involved. Interesting that you say that, Kim, because I don't watch Megyn Kelly, but I don't watch any podcasts, as I said earlier. But somebody told me last night that Megyn Kelly said on her show last night that it's a lie, that the family has not been cleared, that that's all a lie, and that Savannah allegedly, or somebody in her family, told investigators to say they were cleared when truly they're not cleared. Now, I don't know what Megyn Kelly knows. I don't know where she gets that information. If she knows that's real information, if she's guessing, I don't know what's in Megyn Kelly's mind. So I don't know. All I do know is that the Pima County Sheriff's Department did release a statement to say that those siblings and their spouses were clear. Now, whether they really are, I don't know. And Jeannie says, yep, pull up your app. It tells you what you bought last. Yeah, it does. And trust me, Walmart knows exactly what you bought and when you bought it. It's part of how they track their stock. All right, guys, I know there's a lot more to talk about. And let's see, no, they needed a car. She can't walk that good. And if she's unalive, they had to carry her. No way walking. I don't know. There's a lot of people who think that they walked there because there's apparently, some people say, well, there's two people there that night. And I really didn't think so. I kept looking at those two different images. There's one with a guy, I showed him the other day on the show. There's one with a guy with a camo jacket, and there's the other guy we know as the suspect. I used to think those were the same people. Now I think they're two totally different people. Now I see some differences between them. So like one of the running theories has been, which I really wasn't sure of, is that the first guy came, he did whatever he did, maybe panicked and hurt Nancy. And then he called for backup, the second guy to come and help him. And maybe that person brought a vehicle. I don't know. I still think there's a good possibility they used Nancy's own vehicle, quite honestly, because Nancy's vehicle was seized. I don't see any reason why Nancy's vehicle was seized unless it was part of, part of this investigation in some way, that somehow her car became part of it. Now, maybe they rifled through her car and that's why her car was seized. I'm not really sure. I just don't know, but we're going to keep up with it. Unfortunately, I have to run. I've got to get to work. I am pushing my time once again. If there's any new information, of course, I'll be sharing it on the social media pages. And tomorrow, I do plan on having a show tomorrow. I don't think I have work in the morning, early that morning, tomorrow morning. But if I do, of course, I'll let everybody know on social media. But I do hope you guys all have a good day. It was good seeing you all. Good reading all of your comments. And I will look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. It's going to be a beautiful day today. Be sure to get out and enjoy it. I'm Tabitha Hassell with Tabs on Tap. And again, hope you guys have a fantastic day.